and welcome back to Shakespeare Sunday, 1 year on. I'm Miss Douglas, and today we're going to be reading William Shakespeare's Richard III, as rewritten by Andrew Matthews and Tony Ross. And as you can hear, new microphone, and I'm trying something out with a ring light, but I'm not too sure how it's going to go, so we'll figure out how the quality's going to go. I think I'm going to start trying to film these on my phone instead of my other camera I've got here. Anyway, back to Shakespeare. So we're looking at Richard III, and that is set in England in the 15th century, which is the 1400s. So it's a historical play which actually focuses on the king at the time, which can be interpreted as William Shakespeare's attitude towards Richard and the historical events happening in the 1400s. So it's focusing on Richard, who is very power hungry and bitter, and a younger brother of Edward, and the play looks at the attempts and the lengths in which he goes to try and gain and maintain the crown. And this, nice one to start back on, it is as bloody and as medieval as can be. Our main characters are Richard, who begins the play as the Duke of Gloucester and then becomes King Richard III. Then we've got the Duke of Buckingham, who's a follower of Richard. We've got Henry Tudor, who's the Earl of Richmond and then becomes King Henry VII. We have King Edward IV, Prince Edward, who is King Edward's son, and then Richard, the Duke of York, who is also King Edward's son. This is a reading of Richard III, as retold by Andrew Matthews and Tony Ross. Visit the battleground at Bosworth Field alone, and you will meet me without knowing it. My restless spirit will seem to be the sighing of the wind through the branches of a tree, or the creeping shadow of a passing cloud. Long ago I was flesh and blood like you. I was a king until I came here. On this field I lost my crown, my kingdom, and my life. Before I came King Richard, I was Richard, Duke of Gloucester, son of the House of York. Through my deformed back and withered arms, earned me other titles. Richard Crookback, my enemies called me, Hedgehog and Spider. I had many names and many enemies, chiefly in the House of Lancaster. For almost 30 years, the Yorkists and Lancasterians made war to decide who would rule in England. My brother Edward was king until he was overthrown and exiled by King Henry, but he came back with me and our brother George, Duke of Clarence, at his side. King Henry was imprisoned in the Tower of London for his own safety, naturally. Our armies marched west and won a glorious victory over Edward, Prince of Wales, at Tewkesbury. The prince was captured unharmed, but somehow met with an unfortunate accident and died of stab wounds. While my brothers celebrated, I returned to London, paid a secret visit to the king in the Tower, and gave him the sad news of his son's death. Poor Henry was too gentle and too holy to live in this world, so I sent him to the next with the point of my dagger, and gave it out that he died of grief. The old king's tragic death set me thinking. The Yorkists had triumphed over the Lancastrians, but the result was more like a truce than peace. Just below the uneasy surface lay mistrust, hatred, and the desire for revenge. Given such a situation, it grieved me to consider what wickedness a mischievous person might do, simply by dropping hints and spreading rumours. My way was clear. I could have supported my brother the king and toiled to reconcile the houses of York and Lancaster, but peacemaking was not to my taste. The time was right for someone to play the villain, and I was determined to be that someone. I would deceive and double deal and smile, even as I committed murder. When wars end, the victors often fall out, and so it was with us. I made certain of it. During his exile, my brother Edward was struck with a wasting disease that gave him a hollow cough and stretched his skin tightly over his bones. With the throne regained, he ruled England, but his sickness ruled him. He feared plots against him and spoke daily with astrologers, fortune-tellers, and the like. The night I received news that the king had issued a warrant for the arrest of Duke of Clarence, I hurried to Clarence's house and met him in the street outside, accompanied by armed guards. "Why has our brother Edward done this, Clarence?" I cried. Clarence laughed carelessly. "Because my name is George," he said. "Some half-crazed wizard told him that his sons would be cheated of the throne by a man whose name begins with G." "This is the Queen's doing," I growled. "She encourages the king's wild imaginings." The captain of the guard saluted me. "I'm sorry, my Lord Gloucester, but I was given orders that no one should be allowed to talk to the prisoner," he said. "Please stand aside and let me do my duty." "Very well," I agreed. "Don't worry, Clarence. I'll make sure that you're not imprisoned long." As the guards marched their prisoner away to the tower, I smiled to myself, for it was I who taught the wizard what to say to the king, and paid him to say it. "Ah, Clarence," I sighed, "as your brother, I only want what's best for you, and it would be best if your soul were safe in heaven. I will arrange it soon, I promise you." The first part of my plan had been successful. With a light heart, I made my way to Westminster to begin the second part, winning myself a bride. The interior of the abbey was glowing with candlelight. Great stone pillars soared up into the darkness all around me as I searched for the side chapel where the coffin containing the body of the late King Henry lay awaiting burial the following morning. The coffin had been placed on an altar draped with an embroidered cloth. Before the altar, dressed in mourning robes, lay Anne, the widow of Prince Edward. I had heard her beauty praised, though she was a little past her prime, but I had also heard that she was weak-willed and easily led. Now I was about to put the rumour to the test. Lady Anne turned as she heard me slip into the chapel. Her eyes widened in loathing. "What black magician conjured you up, you fiend?" she hissed. I bowed. "I learned that you were keeping vigil here tonight, and I came to offer you my respects." Lady Anne quivered. "I don't want your respects, you filthy toad," she raged. "I want the earth to open up and swallow you back down into hell." "I didn't know that angels could be so angry," I said, flinching. "Why do you speak so harshly to me?" "You murdered my husband," screeched Lady Anne. "So I did, but do you know why?" I retorted. "Because your lovely face burned in my every waking thought and in all my dreams. The idea of you in someone else's arms was more than I could bear. Jealousy drove me out of my wits." Lady Anne's feelings showed in her look. She was both horrified and fascinated, as though she found me repellent yet attractive. Then came my master stroke. I fell to my knees, drew my dagger, closed Lady Anne's hand around the hilt, and bared my neck. "If I can't have your love, give me your hate and kill me," I pleaded. For a moment I thought that she would, but she faltered. The dagger dropped from her fingers and clattered on the flagstones. I picked it up and pressed the edge of the blade to my throat. "Tell me to kill myself," I sobbed. "No," said Lady Anne. "No, I don't want you dead." I gave her my most adoring gaze. "But may I live in hope, my lady," I murmured. We were married 5 days later. His health was failing fast. He ignored the doctors who advised him to rest and insisted on holding a banquet to honour my new bride. Invitations were sent out to the great and the good, and also to those who were not so good. On the morning of the banquet, I gave my faithful and highly inventive follower Tyrrell a warrant permitting him and a companion to enter the tower and question the Duke of Clarence. Tyrrell returned alone at dusk. I found his report most gratifying, almost amusing. At the banquet, King Edward proposed a toast to the House of York and added, "I have good news concerning my brother Clarence. I have signed his pardon, and he will be set free tomorrow." I waited for the murmurs of approval to die down before I spoke. "Your Majesty," I said hesitantly, "has no one informed you?" Clarence is dead. He was found this afternoon in the cellars of the tower, drowned in a barrel of wine. I often warned him of the dangers of drinking, but he paid me no attention." The king fell back into his chair and was racked by a fit of coughing. Blood gushed from his mouth. "Servants!" cried Queen Elizabeth. "Carry the king to his bed! Call the royal physicians!" As the guests waited for the news of the stricken king, they broke into groups and chatted. I found myself in company with the Duke of Buckingham, a man with a reputation for greed and treachery. I admired him. "I wonder what the Queen's brother, Lord Rivers, is discussing so earnestly with Lord Grey, Lord Hastings, and the Earl of Richmond," I said, as I poured more wine into Buckingham's goblet. "How to thwart your ambitions, my lord," he replied. I pursed my lips. "Oh, and do I have ambitions?" "You desire to wear the crown, my lord," said Buckingham. "Suppose I did wear it, would you be for me or against me?" I inquired. Buckingham took a sip of wine. "I am loyal to whoever can afford me," he said. "Would the earldom of Hereford buy your support?" I mused. Buckingham inclined his head. "My lord, I am your man." At that moment the doors of the banqueting hall flew back and Queen Elizabeth appeared. Her hair was in disarray and tears lined her pale cheeks. "The king is dead," she announced. "His dying wish was for his brother Richard of Gloucester to be appointed Lord Protector and given guardianship of our sons." It was neither the time nor the place for grinning, so Buckingham and I smiled at each other with our eyes. And so I became guardian to my nephew Edward, Prince of Wales, who was 12, and my namesake Richard, Duke of York, who was 10. Edward would be crowned king, and I would rule in his name until he was 21. This arrangement caused me some distress. To wield power for a few brief years and then surrender it to my nephew seemed unsatisfactory to me. I thought long and hard about what obstacles lay between me and the throne, and how best to remove them. Buckingham and I burnt out so many candles in our secret nighttime conferences, but our time was well spent. The nation was rocked by a chain of sensational scandals. Papers came to light that proved Lord Rivers and Lord Grey were scheming to kidnap the young princes and hold them ransom. The traitors were arrested, tried, and beheaded. To protect my nephews from other evildoers, I had them moved into the Tower, where I could keep a close eye on their welfare. Meanwhile, Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, suddenly left England for France. Shortly after, my French spies reported that he was attempting to raise an army against me, but I was not alarmed by this. Henry Tudor had Welsh blood in his veins, and what Welshman had ever amounted to anything? More disturbing was a tale that Lord Hastings had boasted of how I would never be king while his head remained on his shoulders. I had the strangest feeling that another shocking scandal was at hand. It broke during a meeting that I called to decide on a date for my nephew's coronation. Hastings was present, along with Buckingham, Lord Stanley, and the Bishop of Ely. Hastings made a long and flowery speech that ended with the suggestion that I should fix the day. My response was a loud groan and a heavy sigh. "Are you unwell, my lord?" asked Hastings. "Sick at heart," I replied. "Tell me, Lord Hastings, what sentence would you pass on to those who used witchcraft to harm the royal family?" "Why, death," Hastings said without hesitation. "Then you have passed sentence on yourself, my lord," I exclaimed, "for you and the late King Henry's wife cursed me with your dark magic." "No!" cried Hastings. "No?" I echoed, raising my withered arm with its clawed hand for all to see. "If I was not cursed, how do you explain this?" Hastings' eyes were empty. "I had him, and he knew it." I cannot explain it, my lord," he stammered. The Bishop of Ely was dumbfounded. "This man should stand trial at once," he mumbled. "No need for a trial," I said. "His guilt is written on his face. Guards, Take Lord Hastings outside and put him to death." The hardest blow of all was quick to follow. Buckingham chanced upon an old chronicle that made it plain that my brother Edward, while still an infant, had been betrothed to the daughter of a French nobleman. The betrothal had long been forgotten, and its rediscovery had far-reaching consequences. It meant that Edward's marriage to Queen Elizabeth had been unlawful. My nephews were illegitimate, and so barred them from inheriting their father's crown. Imagine my feelings when I heard this. Bands of Londoners took to the streets, calling for me to be made king. These loyal outbursts were arranged by Buckingham, who also led the delegation of city worthies who implored me to take the throne. I protested that I was weak and unworthy, but at last they persuaded me to put duty before self, and I accepted the heavy burden of kingship. Events moved swiftly. 2 days before my coronation, I was told that Richmond had set sail from France in command of an invasion fleet. I ordered my navy to sink it. At my coronation feast, my wife Anne fell ill with stomach pains and sickness and had to take to her bed. That evening, Buckingham brought grave news to my private chamber. "Gales have kept your navy in port, sire," he told me. "Richmond has landed on the coast of Wales. Lord Stanley and the Bishop of Ely have joined forces with him." "Ha!" I scoffed. "After I've crushed them, I'll have their heads spiked on London Bridge." I lowered my voice. "Buckingham, issue a proclamation that the Queen is fast approaching her death." Buckingham raised his eyebrows. "Is she, sire?" "If she is not, I pay good money to an apothecary who lied about the poison he supplied me with," I said. "The Queen is too old to give me a male heir, which I need. When I've put down this rebellion, I'll marry my niece Elizabeth. She's young and strong." "Oh, and kill my nephews, would you?" Buckingham cocked his head as though he had misheard. "Sire?" "My nephews are a threat to my royal line. I want them dead," I snapped. "Majesty," blustered Buckingham, "give me a little time to—" "There is no time, Buckingham," I interrupted. Buckingham stiffened. "I'm afraid I must remind your Majesty that you have not yet kept your promise to make me Earl of Hereford." I smiled. "Promise, Buckingham?" "I promised you nothing. Leave me. We will speak again once your memory has improved." When Buckingham had gone, I softly called out, "Tyrrell?" Tyrrell flowed out of the shadows and stood beside me. "Sire?" "I fear that Lord Buckingham will turn against me," I said. "He has no stomach for the business I discuss with him." "Depend on me to deal with it for you, sire," said Tyrrell. "Bear in mind that they are anointed princes," I warned. "Don't shed their precious blood." "Not a drop, sire," Tyrrell vowed. And he was true to his word, for later he described to me how he smothered my nephews. War gathered like clouds in a stormy sky. More nobles deserted me for Richmond, including Buckingham, who was taken prisoner by one of my generals in the course of a minor skirmish. The general sent me Buckingham's head, which I regarded as a great kindness. Richmond's forces marched east, and I marched my armies west to meet him, until we faced each other at Bosworth Field. The night before the battle, I dreamed that I was visited by the ghosts of my victims, who predicted my defeat. I woke up in a cold sweat. "My conscience gives me nightmares, but nothing else," I muttered to the dark. "I won wealth and power without it, and I made myself the man I am, the villain I set out to be." That sly viper Richmond outwitted me and attacked before dawn, when my forces were not fully prepared. His artillery blew gaps in my front lines, and his cavalry surged through. My soldiers might have rallied, but my best commander, the Duke of Norfolk, was reported slain, and his troops retreated in confusion. I tried to bring up reinforcements, but the cowardly Earl of Northumberland refused to obey my orders. The day was lost. The best that I could hope for was to make my escape. Then a volley of arrows cut my steed from under me. I staggered through the smoke of battle, shouting, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" As if in reply, a horse appeared. A dapple-grey war horse galloped towards me, with Henry, Earl of Richmond, on its back. I saw him lean sideways, saw light flash on the blade of his battle-axe as he swung it. My memories end there. I was wrong about Henry Tudor. He amounted to something after all. My crown was placed on his head, and he founded a line of monarchs that last to this day, for his distant descendants still live in royal palaces. As for me, I have shrunk to a breath of wind, a trick of the light. When I am remembered, if I am remembered, I am Richard the Bloody, Richard the Tyrant, who slaughtered the princes in the Tower. Well, it is better than being completely forgotten. In the end, villainy has granted me a kind of immortality. Our main theme throughout this play is villainy. So King Richard is so ruthless and cruel. It's almost over the top, like a pantomime, because it's just in the extreme. There's also a lot of witty asides, a lot of like fourth wall breaking. If you ever go and see the play, or perhaps one of the films, which I'm going to mention soon, it's about trying to win over the audience to see King Richard's point of view and his ideas, why he's chosen to do this. It's also about manipulating weaker characters, and then us as an audience almost celebrate with him. Henry VII, who is mentioned in this, is actually the father of King Henry VIII, the one who has many wives. The musical Six is based off him. And King Henry VII is the grandfather of Queen Elizabeth I, who reigned for many years. And this... Well, Shakespeare wasn't exactly someone to relay history, but rather exaggerate it onto the stage, which we do see with a lot of history just in our books. Who is history written by? I'd argue it is written by the winners. There are a few modern day adaptations that you can watch. It's really important that you check the ratings of any videos or films that are suggested, because they might not be appropriate for you. One film, so Richard III in 1955, so you had Laurence Olivier as the director, the producer, and the lead, who tried to keep it as accurate to the time period and the production, and the film runs for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it was one of the last of Laurence Olivier's Shakespearean films. I haven't seen this one, so I don't have a lot of personal opinions on it, but I just try to get a range when I talk about the modern adaptations, when 1955 might not seem modern, but this play being written 500 odd years ago, 400, 500, this is as modern as it could come. Richard III in 1995 film was directed by Richard Loncraine with Ian McKellen in it, and this version of Richard III is portrayed in 1930s England, in which England is involved in a civil war. And it's heavily influenced by Nazi Germany propaganda. So the use of propaganda in military uniforms throughout it highlights the I always muck up this word, totalitarianism, or the totalitarian regime in which King Richard enforced throughout the film. So I studied this at university, and I am pretty influenced because I like this adaptation. It helped me understand King Richard and the lengths he was going through in a comparison to how Nazi Germany ruled throughout the 1930s, in which I also studied at school. Then you have a 2002 film, King Ricky, which is also known as The Street King, which is an adaptation of the East LA turf wars, where Ricky Ortega kills his brothers and rivals to gain the ultimate power within LA. I personally haven't seen this film, but that I would say would be the most modern adaptation as such of it, in which 15th century England is translated to East LA, early 2000s.